It was a cold, foggy evening at the riverside marina. The sound of water gently lapping against the boats filled the air, and the dim glow of the streetlights reflected off the wet docks. Detective Arthur Lane, a tall man with a sharp mind and a sharper eye, stood at the edge of the pier, staring at the scene before him. A small crowd had gathered around Boat 12, a luxurious yacht named the Silver Swan. Inside the yacht, the body of a wealthy businessman, Mr. Harold Whittaker, lay slumped over his desk. Detective Lane adjusted his hat and stepped onto the yacht. The local police had already cordoned off the area, but they were waiting for him to take charge. Lane was known for solving the most puzzling cases, and this one seemed no different. The victim, Mr. Whittaker, was a well-known figure in the city. He had made his fortune in shipping and was often seen at the marina, overseeing his business. But tonight, he was dead, and the circumstances were suspicious. There was no sign of forced entry, and nothing seemed to be stolen. Yet the look on Whittaker's face was one of sheer terror. Lane began his investigation by examining the body. Whittaker had been poisoned. A small glass of brandy, still half full, sat on the desk. The detective carefully picked it up and sniffed it. A faint, bitter smell confirmed his suspicion. Cyanide. Next, Lane turned his attention to the cabin. The room was tidy, with no signs of a struggle. A ledger lay open on the desk, filled with numbers and names. Lane flipped through it, noticing a few entries that had been crossed out. He made a mental note to look into them later. As he stepped out of the cabin, Lane noticed a small wet footprint on the deck. It was fresh, likely from someone who had been on the yacht recently. He followed the trail, which led to the edge of the boat and disappeared. Whoever had left the print had likely jumped onto the dock and flowed into the night. Lane questioned the marina staff and the few witnesses who had been nearby. One of the dock workers, a young man named Tom, mentioned seeing a shadowy figure near the Silver Swan earlier that evening. "I thought it was just Mr. Whittaker," Tom said, "but now I'm not so sure." Another witness, Mrs. Clara Bennett, a neighbor who lived on a nearby houseboat, claimed she had heard raised voices coming from the yacht around 8 p.m. "It sounded like an argument," she said, "but I couldn't make out what they were saying." Detective Lane's next step was to interview Whittaker's associates. He started with Mr. James Carter, Whittaker's business partner. Carter was a nervous man, constantly fidgeting with his tie. "Harold and I had our differences," he admitted, "but I would never harm him. We were about to close a major deal. His death ruins everything." Next, Lane spoke to Whittaker's personal assistant, Miss Emily Harris. She was calm and composed, but seemed genuinely upset by her employer's death. "Mr. Whittaker was a difficult man to work for," she said, "but he was fair. I can't imagine who would want to hurt him." As Lane pieced together the information, one name kept coming up: Victor Reed, a rival businessman who had been in a bitter feud with Whittaker over a lucrative contract. Reed had been seen at the marina earlier that day, and witnesses claimed he had been arguing with Whittaker. Lane decided to pay Reed a visit. He found him at his office, a sleek, modern building overlooking the city. Reed denied any involvement in Whittaker's death. "Yes, we had a disagreement," he said, "but that's all it was. I had no reason to kill him." Just as Lane was about to leave, he noticed something odd. Reed's shoes were wet, and there was a faint smell of the marina on his coat. Lane's mind raced back to the wet footprint on the yacht. Returning to the marina, Lane re-examined the ledger he had found on Whittaker's desk. The crossed-out entries turned out to be payments to Reed's company, payments that had mysteriously stopped a month ago. It seemed Whittaker had discovered Reed was embezzling funds, and he had threatened to expose him. With this new evidence, Lane confronted Reed. Under pressure, Reed broke down and confessed. He had gone to the yacht to confront Whittaker, but the argument had turned violent. In a fit of rage, Reed had poisoned Whittaker's drink and fled, leaving behind the wet footprint as evidence of his guilt. As the fog lifted over the marina, Detective Lane stood on the dock, watching as Reed was taken away by the police. Another mystery solved, but the marina, with its dark waters and hidden secrets, would always remain a place of intrigue.